So Malcolm would say, well, let's go play Robin Hood. Well, so we'd go back there to play Robin Hood. Robin Hood was Malcolm. And these white kids would go along with it.
Malcolm said he was the lightest skinned of the 7 children born to Earl and Louise Little. A reminder, he said, of the white man who had raped his mother's mother. In 1929, when Malcolm was 4 years old, his father, a carpenter and preacher, moved the family to Lansing, Michigan.
Lansing was a small town, and the west side was the side of town that blacks lived on. Malcolm and his family lived outside of the city, and they had a 4-acre parcel with a small house on it. So they were sort of considered as farmers.
3 months after the Littles moved in, white neighbors took legal action to evict them. A county judge ruled that the farm property was restricted to whites only. But Earl Little refused to move. Here in Michigan, Ku Klux Klan membership was at least 70,000, 5 times more than in Mississippi. For Malcolm's family, white hostility was a fact of life.
Everybody was asleep in our house, and all of a sudden we heard a big boom. And when we woke up, fire was everywhere. And everybody was running into the walls and into each other, you know.
Well, what I recall about that was my mother telling us to get up, get up, get up, the house is on fire, and to get out. That's what I actually recall.
I could hear my mother yelling, I hear my father yelling, and so they made sure they got us all rounded up and got us out.
The house burned down to the ground. No fire wagon came, nothing. And we were burned out.
Malcolm's father, Earl Little, accused local whites of setting the fire. The police accused Earl and arrested him on suspicion of arson. The charges were later dropped.
In the city where we grew up, whites would refer to us as those uppity niggers, or those smart niggers that live out south of town. In those days, whenever a white person referred to you as a smart nigger, that was their way of saying, this is a nigger you have to watch because he's not dumb.
My father was independent. He didn't want anybody to feed him. He wanted to raise his own food. He didn't want anybody to exercise authority over his children. He wanted to exercise the authority, and he did.
He was always speaking in terms of Marcus Garvey's way of thinking and trying to get black people to organize themselves, not to cause any trouble, but just to work in unity with each other toward improving their conditions. But in those days, if you did that, you were still considered a troublemaker.
In the 1920s, Marcus Garvey, a black nationalist, preached that black Americans should build a nation independent of white society. With membership in the hundreds of thousands, Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association sought closer ties with African countries. The UNIA had its own flag, its own national anthem, and an African Legion pledged to defend black people at home and abroad. The U.S. Bureau of Investigation labeled Garvey one of the prominent Negro agitators. The federal government deported him in 1927, but Malcolm's parents remained Garveyites. Earl recruited new members. Louise wrote for the Garvey newspaper.
My mother is the one who would read to us the Garvey paper, which was called the Negro World. She also would talk to us about ourselves as being independent. We shouldn't be calling ourselves Negroes or niggers, and that we were black people, and that we should be proud to call ourselves black people.
What is your real name? Malcolm X.
Is that your legal name?
As far as I'm concerned, it's my legal name.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
My father didn't know his last name. My father got his last name from his grandfather, and his grandfather got it from his grandfather, who got it from the slave master. The real names of our people were destroyed during slavery.
Was there any line, any point in the genealogy of your family when you did have to use the last name, and if so, what was it?
The last name of my forefathers was taken from them when they were brought to America and made slaves. And then the name of the slave master was given, which we refuse. We reject that name today.
You mean you won't even tell me what your father's supposed last name was or gifted last name was?
I never acknowledge it whatsoever.
September 1931. Malcolm was 6 years old when his mother had a premonition.
We were all at the house when we had supper together. And my mother was holding Wesley, who was my youngest brother. And she may have been nursing him because she was at the table, and she fell asleep holding the baby. And my father had gotten up and went in the bedroom to clean up, to go down and collect money. And she woke up and she said, Earl, don't go downtown. She said, if you go, you won't come back.
That night, around 11 o'clock, Earl Little was found in an isolated area outside Lansing. His body almost cut in two by the wheels of a streetcar. The police reported Earl Little's death an accident.
There was a cloud over that whole issue because at the time it was perceived that rather than an accident with a streetcar, that Earl Little had really been pushed under the wheels of the streetcar. As a matter of fact, I remember hearing just that language, that he was probably pushed under the wheels of that streetcar.
My father's death caused a great, great shock in the family because he was the power. He was the strength. We were organized. We were a structured family. When we got out of school, me and my brothers and sisters, we'd come right home and go to work in the garden, clean up the chicken shed, and get ready for the night. And get up in the morning and all this. We pump the water and bring it in the house and all this. This was while Dad was alive. Because to not do this brought the consequence of a whipping. So we were disciplined. And then after my father got killed, and my mother's inability to run as fast as I could run, or Malcolm, enabled us to get away with a lot of things we wouldn't have tried to get away with. So we got looser and looser.
Louise Little struggled to raise her 7 children through the years of the Great Depression.
She's reduced to where she has no income. She got jobs. She was a proud lady. She had a lot of pride. She sewed. She crocheted gloves for people. She did a lot of things, not to be dependent solely on welfare. She didn't like them telling her what she could do and what she couldn't do.
And this is one of the main things that devastated her more than anything else. As time went by, you could see she was wearing down.
For 7 years, as Malcolm grew into adolescence, his mother slowly withdrew from her family. 2 days before Christmas, 1938, Louise Little was diagnosed as paranoid and was sent to Kalamazoo State Hospital.
And I came home from school one day, and she wasn't there. I can remember being empty because my mother had never left us. And I felt, the pain of her being gone every day.